Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Excellent. Neighbors are the source of numerous blessings and also the source of numerous conflicts. I have to say that personally, it wasn't until I was living in Baltimore in my first position as a rabbi that I actually had neighbors I would call good neighbors, people that I felt I could depend on and who would be nice. Remember very distinctly the first major snowstorm. All of us were out shoveling one driveway, one street, one area after the other as a community effort. I was not raised, however, with good neighbors. Most of the time growing up, our neighbors were not only just not good, they were horrible neighbors. The type of neighbors that have loud, drunken parties with underage drinking. The type of neighbors who get a visit from the sheriff every couple weeks. The type of neighbors who continue to harass and shout and yell at you as you drive in and out of your property. The type of neighbors who think that they can do whatever they want with your property. Whether it be digging through your driveway, whether it be cutting down trees that are yours, or doing anything else. It turns out that respecting each other's property, respecting that property line between one house and another, is a big part of what establishes a decent relationship within a neighborhood. So then, when the Torah tells us in this week's Torah portion, don't move your neighbor's boundary marker, it is not for nothing. This is indeed a central problem within many people's communities. People who will argue about, no, that tree is really on my property, no, it's on my property, no, the sprinklers go here, no, the sprinklers go there. You're not allowed to park your RV there, you're not allowed to dig your trench. The issues of where the property line continues to be an issue today. And the Torah was very concerned in the ancient world where we didn't have the surveyor's office in the city hall to go and look up the different markers of property, that someone would move the stone boundary markers that would be placed a little bit this way, maybe a little bit more, and maybe a little bit more, until they had eaten away at their neighbor's territory. But our commentators ask, why does the Torah need to tell us this? Because to do so would be an act of theft. And the Torah has already told us, don't steal. What is special about this particular form of stealing, the moving of a boundary marker from another person, that the Torah needs to mention it now in its own context? The first answer they give is that this is specifically referring, as it says in context, to the boundary markers that will mark the territory as allotted and allocated during the time of Joshua, the initial tribal boundaries and the initial divisions within the tribal boundaries. These were meant to be the core basis for each family's ability to have access to all that they needed to grow and support themselves. The means of production, if you will, to be able to make sure they still had their farm land. And to move those boundaries would be to not only steal from them, but would be to alienate them from the inheritance that God had promised all of the children of Israel. But, as interesting as that may be, why place it here in this Torah portion of Shoftim, and specifically, why place it just after a long discussion of the issue of accidental murder, what we would call manslaughter, and deliberate murder? Says the great commentary of Vizkuni, because that is human nature. He says, what is the cause among normal people of the types of fights and arguments that could lead to one person harming another unto death? Property. It's about where your tree is. It's about where your plow lives. It's about what you cut down or what you threw. These are the types of acts that disrespect the lines between neighbors that will often lead to bloodshed between them. And that continues to be the case. Follow any of the unfortunate events on newspapers of people fighting against one another, and a large portion of it comes down either to fights about relationships or fights about property. It is either about two people who are upset with each other for how they have been unfaithful, or about two neighbors upset with how someone has been trespassing in one form or another on the rights that each neighbor should have. This works, we know, intuitively at a macro level, internationally. Of course, we know most wars are begun because of an inability to agree and to settle on a border area that is between them. But even in our own personal lives, we have to recognize, we have to respect the area that is ours and the area that is another. And if you are renting or if you do not have property of your own, remember this still applies for how one treats and respects the neighbors throughout an apartment complex or any other form of shared residence. There needs to always be a respect of what has been set aside for my use, what has been set aside for each other's use, and how we allow each to enjoy the blessings that God has given. When we have that basic foundation of respect and tolerance, then we can build up, and eventually we'll be shoveling each other's driveways. Not so much for snow here in Florida, but as I do remember from my own neighborhood in the first hurricane that I was here for, we'll be out with the chainsaws and hacking up the trees that are blocking the roads. It's a sign of a good neighbor that doesn't wonder whose tree was it, but just how can we fix it together. Shabbat Shalom.